Welcome to Flip Your Lid with Kim Honeycutt. Kim is a psychotherapist and executive director of ICU Talks, a mental health speaking ministry. This is a podcast about how to flip your lid and learning how to reconnect to who you really are.
Well, hi, everybody, Flip Your Lid audience. Thank you for joining us. I have Josh Scott with me today. If he lived in Charlotte, he and I would be besties. But however, he lives in Nashville or near Nashville. He is a pastor, has been for a couple of decades. And his focus is on reimagining, reframing, and reclaiming faith through a progressive Christian lens. He lives near Nashville, as I stated, and his wife's name is Carla, and he has 5 kids that he knows of. So we will leave it there. So Josh, thank you for being a part of Flip Your Lid audience. It's really good to see you.
It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the only question that's predetermined is just to throw this your way and let's just see where this goes. So we would like to know, start with what flipped your lid and what is an event or an experience, and what have you had to do? What measures have you had to take in order to reconnect to who you really are?
When we were talking about email about that, there have been so many of those experiences that I would qualify as being lid flipping moments.
Right.
But I think it really began sort of the moment that disrupted my entire life, the moment that disrupted the way I saw the world, the way I understood the divine, those sorts of things would have been when I was 11 years old. So my grandfather was a Free Will Baptist pastor, and Free Will Baptists are really, to call them conservative seems like an understatement.
Yes,
King James only,
right?
That sort of thing. And his mom, my great grandmother, so I lived between them. My grandfather on the right and my great grandmother on the left, depending on where you were standing in the ark.
Right.
My great grandmother in 93 in January, she passed away of cancer, and it happened real suddenly. We, went from she just wasn't feeling well, and then suddenly she was in the hospital, and then suddenly she was gone.
Wow.
Then in July of the same year, my grandfather passed, and he passed in a really dramatic way. He was a pastor. We were at church. They had a yearly business meeting on Saturday nights. It was July of 93. And it was a really contentious business meeting for some reason. And somebody said to him during the business meeting, "You're the problem and you need to go away."
Wow. And
almost that instant, he had a massive heart attack and died.
Wow, Josh.
So, I was 11 at the time, almost 12. And it just completely wrecked me. And in every possible way. I lost the 2 people who were dearest to me in the world within, 7 months of each other. And then the way he passed and the context surrounding it, where it happened in church,
right?
Related to church, it was. Even now when I tell people the story, they're like, that you have to be embellishing some of that. And I'm really not. It's exactly what happened.
Right. Wow. So I can just see like that. So now you're 11 and 12, which is not the easiest age to be. Lost 2 significant people. So tell me a little bit more about how that reshaped, or you had to reinvent yourself when it comes to your faith, knowing that you lost your grandfather and it's all related and connected. Again, looking from an 11-year-old's point of view, how do you reshape that?
Yeah, well, at the time I didn't. I developed so many, I can remember being so afraid that anybody I was close to would die. That was a phobia I developed, out of that trauma. Right. I can remember being, 12 years old and sort of army crawling through across the house just to get to outside of my parents' bedroom, just to listen in the night to make sure they were still breathing.
Wow. Yeah, that's trauma.
And that's trauma. And, I really decided that if God was real, that God wasn't good.
Yeah.
And so I went through, I didn't say it out loud. I never told anybody really, but sort of either being an atheist or just not caring about God, like thinking if God is real, God doesn't deserve my energy, my time. And so I can remember my mom taking me to school in the morning, being in middle school, and her talking to me about God. In my brain, I'm rolling my eyes at her.
Yeah.
And just sort of like, I wasn't, I was, taught not to use certain words. So I wouldn't even use those words in my brain at that point, but as close as I could get to them, like that's, and, if you want me to, I can get more into how sort of I came out of that process. But really for me, it was a several year period of either waffling between not believing there was a God or hoping that there wasn't a God, because it made more sense for the world. The tragedy of the world began to make more sense to me if there wasn't a God who was a part of it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And plus also being at home, I would think would then be a trigger for you because you lived in between both of them. All right. And so like, where could you go? What could you do to not feel the grief, to not feel the pain? Did you go into self-harm? Did you go into some path to try to not feel that level of trauma and grief?
I think if I did anything, it was, I've always, and it's been a thing I've had to deal with and become better at over the years, but I just didn't have a lot of people I was close to.
Yeah.
I think I tried to limit who was in that a certain level of closeness to me, because if people got close, I mean, of course, at that age, immediately saying, well, I get close to people and they die.
Right.
So maybe me being close to people is the problem. So even, I can look back on high school and I had some friends, but I didn't have close friends. And I didn't, like some people look back on their formative years like that. And even like I look back on my college years and there are people I really am not still close to anybody from that time of my life. Now, what's been fun in the last several years is the few of us from my high school era who have ended up being progressives have found each other. And that has been a gift.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I just didn't have any of that, sort of, when you think of your best friend in high school, I just don't,
right.
I don't know that anybody would think of me that way.
Right. I got you.
Everything was on the surface.
Right. So you did certain things to keep people at a distance to not feel, because if you don't get connected, you don't get hurt if there's a loss.
And what I did was just be shy. Like what's funny is I don't know if you know much about the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 7.
I'm an Enneagram expert in my opinion. Probably not true, but I'm an Enneagram 8.
Okay.
We are the best number. I'm just saying.
I'm a 7, and but I'm also somewhat. Growing up, I was somewhat of an introvert and shy. So once I get out there, I'm full on Enneagram 7. But I was shy, and so I just didn't talk to people very much. Just sort of. I don't know. I think I didn't do things like act out to get people away from me. I just kept everything really, really tight. Yeah,
absolutely. And so you brought up that your high school friends now are progressives. Can you define that for us and talk a little bit what it means to be progressive? And if you could throw some information out there for people about kind of how you and I got connected, was that your ordination was stripped away recently and you were very open about that on Facebook. And so can we kind of go through those two?
Yeah. So when I talk about, when I say I'm a progressive Christian, what I mean is I'm a Christian who, I could go through the several things, I don't take everything literally. I don't take the Bible literally. I love the Bible. The Bible is a vital part of I've given my entire life to studying and teaching it. I love it. Don't take it all literally. I would say I don't believe the Bible's inerrant and fallible. That would be a piece of that. But I would also say it has to do with this understanding that our faith is ever unfolding and ever evolving.
Right.
That everything that needs to be said hasn't been said in the past. And so it is this willingness and openness and almost passion to continue exploring, continue learning, continue growing, letting go of things that no longer serve us well.
Right.
And then embracing something new that maybe is the next phase of the journey. And I've been what I would call a progressive Christian. I've probably been there for about a decade. When people ask me, when did your sort of unraveling deconstruction journey begin? I always say it began when I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
But it kickstarted again in earnest after, I started preaching when I was around 16. So I'm going to be 40 this weekend. And so that's a long time. I've been more than 20 years at this thing.
Right.
But so in my early 20s, I started what I would consider deconstructing being aware of it. Like, oh, my faith, something's happening to all of this stuff I've been taught I have to believe.
Yeah.
And so, when I grew up, after we left the Free Will Baptist Church shortly after my grandfather passed, and we went liberal, became Southern Baptist. Believe it or not, that was considered a liberal move.
Yeah, right.
That's a liberal move. And I was ordained there when I was 20. And and to be fair, they rescinded my home church voted and sent me a letter and rescinded my ordination this past summer. To be fair, a couple things. One, I didn't consider that my ordination anymore anyway.
Right.
I mean, we parted. And two, it's within their rights to do. I mean, I don't believe the Bible's infallible. I'm affirming and perform LGBTQ plus weddings. I mean, there's so many reasons for them to do that.
Right.
The thing that was hurtful about it to me was that they didn't even reach out to me to talk to me. Because if they had, they wouldn't have had to done a church-wide vote. Yeah. I would have just gladly given it to them and acknowledged that we've parted ways. And what was hurtful was some of the very names on my ordination were the names on the letter. Somebody on that letter I baptized when I was at that church, my home church. And so for me, it was not even about the fact that they wanted to make a public sort of, we need to, we can't have your stink on us at all. And I would get that. It was sort of the way they did it in the unfeeling and uncaring way, which to me is one of the major issues of conservative Christianity is they put doctrinal purity over actual human beings, which Jesus continually did the opposite of.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's so well said. And just the idea of, because them doing that is part of the overall problem so many people are having. It's why 67 million people in the past 2 years, my understanding statistically, have left the church, is because it's about power and not loving someone in power, right? Or just or using love as power. It becomes about being powerful.
Yeah, power over versus power with or power for or power under. Or there's so many. I mean, power is not a bad thing if it's used well, and if it's used for the purpose of coming alongside those who don't have it.
Right.
But what often happens is, so much of American culture is built on greed anyway, and we just want more and more and more for our own benefit.
Right. It's a lot to say, that the Bible is, because we're taught this inherent, and that it's every word is true, and that I wasn't even raised in the church, and I still have been taught, if I believe anything in the Bible, if I question any of it, then automatic ticket to hell.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So really, for you to be able to speak publicly about that, and I subscribe to your email and different things, and I suggest anyone do that, because even if someone doesn't agree with what you're saying, if I'm confident in what I believe, I can bring in other information. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But we are taught to not bring in other information.
Yeah. I mean, one of the criticisms I hear even from family is, well, you remember when you first started preaching, you used to say that you should really only read the Bible. Yeah, I said that because that's what they told me.
Right.
But I was also 16. Why are you listening to me tell you what you should do with your life? I'm 16.
Hey,
That's
16.
what I'm doing in my life.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is I learned very, very, I learned that you actually, everybody's using something to interpret the Bible, whether that's your pastor's lens or your neighbor's lens or your grandpa's lens, or, you're using somebody's giving you away and saying, because the reality is if everybody saw the Bible the same way and there was one interpretation, we wouldn't have more than 30,000 denominations.
Very true.
And we wouldn't have multiple biblical canons. I mean, the idea that we sort of live with this Protestant exceptionalism, where for me growing up Protestant, like our Bible canon is the Bible canon. Well, actually, Catholics have more books, and they include the Deuterocanonical books. And there's actually a church called the Ethiopian Tawahedo Church that has more than 80 books in their canon, and they're Christian.
Right.
And so if we're and then you have to deal with the fact that for the first few hundred years of what became Christianity, they didn't have a canon. They didn't have a Bible. They didn't even have a full Hebrew Bible. I mean, the Hebrew Bible wasn't fully canonized until the year 100 CE in our era. So, I mean, this idea that, well, without the Bible, I love the Bible. I'm gonna, I hope my dying breath is teaching somebody the Bible. I love it.
Right.
But the idea that our faith hinges on it and only it, and that it is the most important piece of the puzzle, just ignores basically all the evidence.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And so what's it been like for you to be at GracePointe Church, right? To be there. Are you the founder of that church? And so the people kind of followed you where you were, or did it become progressive in time and people became more open?
So I came to GracePointe when GracePointe was a progressive church. So a guy named Stan Mitchell, who has gone on to, he does a thing called Everybody Church now with Ray Waters in Atlanta. He's an LGBTQ plus advocate and ally. There's a lot of his work centers on that. But so I got to know Stan. I was in a church in rural Kentucky, leading that church to become progressive. So when I became the pastor of the church, it was, a community church, and, all community churches are sort of like fundamentalist Baptist churches with better music generally.
With better music, yeah.
And so that was what we were. But I was going through this process of my faith. When I took the job at 23, was there for 14 years, and I took the job and I was unraveling. I knew I wanted to be a pastor, but I also knew that everything was falling apart for me, faith-wise. And so eventually I was able to articulate that to the elders and say that, I am LGBTQ plus affirming. My faith has changed in all these key issues. I'm going to tell you what that is, and then you can make a decision about what you do with it. If that is, I need to resign, if that is, this is a journey we're all going to go on. And to their credit, they said, this is a journey we're going to take as a church.
Wow.
Now, they also, a good chunk of them ended up leaving as a result of it anyway.
Right.
But I led this church from, if Kentucky's a red state, whatever the deepest red is, this county we were in was that kind of conservative, fundamental. And we went through the process of becoming an affirming church and becoming a progressive church. And so after I'd been there 14 years, Stan was leaving GracePointe and said, hey, would you consider applying for the position here? I think that you would be a good fit. And we knew each other. I knew GracePointe. We didn't live far apart. We're about an hour and a half away from each other. And it just ended up being a great fit. And so I've been at GracePointe 2.5 years now, going on 3.
That's great.
And just absolutely love it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So how did you get to a point, because, just to be heterosexual and to not, I assume that's not a struggle whatsoever for you. And again, it's only a struggle for those of us who are told that that something's wrong with us, right? That's the only reason it becomes a struggle. But, just for you to get to a point that you're not only affirming, openly affirming, so much so that I saw recently that you had a panel of wonderful people who are a part of the gay alphabet, right? And people, being a part. And I saw on Instagram you were posting, people were attacking y'all, bringing up scripture, which obviously means I haven't really studied the scripture, but on the surface, that's what it says, right? But unless you study it and understand it. So how did you get to a point? Because you didn't have to get there, and yet you got there. And I think that's so beautiful. Yeah.
I get asked this question a lot, and I feel like, there's, in some ways, I feel like both my wife and I ended up just realizing together that we were affirming. If that makes sense, is that we would start to have friends coming out to us, and we would sort of be like, oh, yeah, we're so happy for you, and we support you, and we want you to, we want you to have everything that we want for us.
Yeah.
But I had a memory the other day that came back to me from, so Jay, you know who Jay Baker is?
Yes. Yes.
So Jay had a show on, I forget what channel, AMC, A&E. He had a sort of a reality show around him several years ago, 10 years ago or more. And so I started following Jay, and I remember on social media, which was pretty new then, Twitter, Jay would tweet and he would ask the question, are you affirming? And I remember that was the first time I thought, what does that mean? Are you affirming? Affirming of what? And so then I started looking into it, and I was like, oh, I think maybe I am. And I don't know why I am. I know that everything I've been taught says I'm not.
Right.
But I also have this sense that I've been meeting people who are coming out, who I know them and I know their lives, and I know that they're deeply faithful, wonderful people. And so I don't feel like I can reject them. I don't feel like I can label them as somehow other than me, other than a friend, a brother, a sister, a sibling. And so, it was, I know people, it was a struggle for them to become affirming. And now what I did have to do is I did have to then deal with the Bible.
Yes.
So for me, and I feel like there's an actually biblical pattern for this that shows up again and again, which is people have an experience that is outside of what they've been taught.
Mm-hmm.
That experience transforms them. And then they have to go back to the Bible to make sense of like, how do I talk about this to other people who are going to say, but the Bible says.
Right.
And so that for me was a longer journey of wrestling with those, 6, 7 texts that are known as the clobber passages, and figuring out how do I address them and how do I deal with them. And so that was a bit longer, but I was affirming before I actually dealt with the Bible around it.
Right. It's just knowing that Jesus came human to affirm all humans.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And just the idea of, and I love, and I think it's in John 15 where Jesus says, I've shown you and told you everything the Father has told me to share with you. And that cleanses me, because there's nothing about sexual orientation in his teachings. He taught about people. And so just the idea that, again, when I die, when I go to heaven, that it's not about sexual orientation or gender or my eye color, right? Like, it's really thinking what actually goes to heaven, right? Because if it's about all those things, that's so what ties us to the earth. It's not about our soul.
And, one of the scriptures that helped me greatly was Acts chapter 10, which is where Simon Peter has this vision of a sheet that gets dropped down. And there are all these animals on it, and he's told by God in this voice, get up, kill, and eat. He's like, those are unclean animals. I've never. And happens 3 times, and God says, don't call anything unclean that I've called clean.
Whew, and
good. For me, that text was that thing of he's having an experience,
right?
That then he's going to have to go figure out what to do with it. And of course, they begin wrestling with how do we include Gentiles based on Scripture, because we believe we've had experiences of God working in Gentiles. We've experienced the Spirit present in the life and work of Gentiles. We can't exclude them any longer. What do we do with the Bible? And that was very similar to my experience of God is at work in the LGBTQ plus community. LGBTQ Christians are just as Christian as I'm Christian. Actually, in many ways, many of them are more so than me. And so it was, okay, I've got to do some wrestling with Scripture, because and fully willing to say, even if I can't figure this out in the Bible, I know what I've experienced.
Right, absolutely.
And I trust that if the Spirit is moving in this way, I'm going to be on the side of Spirit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the way.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. What's been the most surprising or even shocking thing for you as a pastor of, a progressive movement? How
sometimes you end up still being caught, like, obviously conservatives aren't going to like you, but there have just been times when, like, non-religious progressives are really angry and hostile as well. And I'm like, I think we probably agree on way more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, as a progressive Christian, I feel like I have more in common with progressive Muslims or progressive Jews or progressive Buddhists than I do conservative Christians, right? Because we're approaching our faith with a similar ethos in a similar way. And so it's just that reality for me has been really surprising, is that, there's still, like, there just can be so much hostility coming from everywhere. And so that's been a little disappointing, but I also get it, because so many people who lean left, who lean progressive, who are now not, probably at one point were so deeply wounded by religion. So I also try to just honor, like, so much of what they're feeling is not about me, and it's not about GracePointe. It is about their own serious church trauma, which is a very real, painful. I mean, we all have. If you've been in church at some point, you probably have some of that, whether you know it or not.
Right. Well, even that's part of how you started questioning, was be 11 years old and have religious trauma.
Yep.
Right. To have people treat each other that way. Right. Yep. And and I wonder if that's part of your beautiful empathy and compassion that you have, of just knowing that most people who are walking around, who have taken the time to doubt, because, it's Brian Lauren, I think, this says that the only way to get to the next level of your faith is to doubt.
Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing statement, right? But to do that means you will have religious trauma. If you openly talk with people about that you're questioning certain things in the Bible, people become incredibly scared, and then they defend and deflect.
Yeah, which is, I mean, their response is also a response, a trauma response. It's a response of if I don't have this right, I'm going to literally spend eternity being tortured.
Right.
An interesting text for me lately has been the story, Matthew 28, what we call the Great Commission. Mm-hmm. But there's this moment when Jesus meets them on the mountaintop after he's been raised up. And it says, in most English translations, it'll say something like, they worshiped, but some doubted. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is the word some is not there in Greek. The actual language is they worshiped and doubted.
Oh, wow.
It's not two
That's
groups
amazing.
of people. You have some over here worshiping and some doubting. Present within these folks who are experiencing this Jesus after his death, there are people who are going, yes, but also really. I mean, it reminds me of the story in the Gospels where Jesus says the man has a sick child and he wants Jesus to heal him. And Jesus says, well, everything's possible for those who believe. And he's like, well, I believe, but help my unbelief.
All right. Yeah.
It's like, I think the most honest place we can ever exist is, I believe, maybe I want to believe, I'm working on belief, but there's still unbelief. There's still doubt present. And it doesn't seem to be a problem for Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I find it amazing. I'm sure my testimony of a lot of people of, I was drinking and drugging, that people kept telling me about this God who sent his son, that I was worthy of his son being crucified and resurrected, and that God, that Father, was going to help me and get me out of alcoholism and help me know that I deserve better. Well, at some point I believed that and got sober and became a Christ follower. And then I was told, well, now you have to earn your status and your salvation and how God feels about you. And this whole picture of always seeking approval and having to do more in the church for the Father. All right. And so it was just tough to fight against that lie, which I now believe a lie. And then to come out, as gay, married to a woman, and then to all of a sudden be told that I'm not worthy of being on stage anymore. All right. That now I've lost any worth I've had to earn for these 26 years. I now have lost by becoming more of who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people are being forced to choose between, at least it feels like to them, because that's what their conservative churches are making them do, is choose between being your fullest, most authentic self and being part of our group.
That's right.
And I think it was Irenaeus who said, and if it's not Ignatius, Irenaeus, somebody with their name started with an I said, the glory of God is a human being fully alive.
That's good.
And so, when people ask me, what is your hermeneutic? What is your interpretive lens? How do you make decisions? Human flourishing. Yeah. Human flourishing. Yeah. Because I think that is ultimately us becoming all we can be, us being our fullest, truest selves is the thing that I think we were put in this world to do.
Yeah.
So to say to somebody who you love, or any of those things that the LGBTQ community hears on a regular basis, that you're actually violating the image of God in them when you tell them there's something wrong with them. You're actually violating the image of God in them when you don't say, you know what, yes, pursue that journey. We're going to celebrate you. We'll march in the Pride Parade with you. We will be your place of safety where you can be your fullest and truest self. I mean, that's what the church should be.
Yeah, but your courage in not just stating that, you're living that, you're helping people know they're allowed to walk in to a church and be openly celebrated. That really it's incredibly courageous, because there are people who are privately affirming, but they can't be publicly affirming in the church because they'll lose members and then they'll lose money. And that seems to be what it comes back to.
It doesn't, I'll say more about this in a second. It doesn't feel courageous at all to me. It feels like I'm late to the party. But for so many people, like when I have pastors reach out and they're thinking about doing this, becoming affirming in their churches, what I'm now like, it's such a privilege to be able to have the discussion about whether or not you'll do something when they're actual humans who are just trying to survive by being honest about who they are. It really, to me, like this whole thing about whether or not a church becomes affirming and being privately affirming, that is such a privilege that folks in the LGBTQ plus community don't have. So it doesn't feel courageous to me. I don't feel like I've done anybody any favors. And I think I said this Sunday in that panel, I feel like what I am doing now is I'm not making space at the table. I'm coming to a table that is full of my LGBTQ plus siblings because it's rightfully theirs, and I'm asking them to give me a seat.
Yeah.
Because I was wrong for such a long time.
Yeah.
Or too scared, right? Living in that privilege of being too scared about being honest about what I believed. And so now I feel like I'm just trying to make up for lost time.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful statement, but I can feel that, like you've got emotion around that, like it really means something to you to be at that table.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is where I get the sense that the Spirit is at work. And when people who have been rejected and wounded and harmed, and when through just being excluded or through the evil of conversion therapy, like all these things that people have been through. And when a person in the LGBTQ plus community comes to GracePointe, or they come to me and they trust me, they trust me as a safe place. They trust our church that as much as they've been wounded. I mean, GracePointe really is not just for LGBTQ plus folks, but for lots of folks who've been wounded by religion and hurt. GracePointe is their last stop on the way out. Their next stop is what I love what John Shelby Spahn called the Church Alumni Association. Yeah. Like they're done after this. And so I take, like, this is a sacred trust that is being placed in us. For them to come into the space or to reach out to me and to share who they are, and then sort of say, I'm trusting that this is going to be what you say it is. Yeah. Like that feels like such a sacred trust. And we take it so seriously. Yeah. And it just feels like I'm being given the gift.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that and your sincerity in what you're saying. And I think it's just a matter of, like, I'm sure your church, like if you're an immigrant, you can be there. If you have a certain blemish history, you can be there. Like it's just, there's such an openness that's there. But because of that, other people don't invite you to the table. Right? I assume there's certain places you can't, just like now I'm not allowed to speak certain places. I assume now you're not allowed to speak and you're not invited to certain places, only because you're actually loving the marginalized people.
There have been costs to that. Family relationships are awkward. I've had to limit who in my family I can allow around my social media. I've had to limit, I've lost, probably, some of the hardest relationships, even harder than familiar relationships for me was, when the person who'd been my pastor, who gave me the opportunity to start preaching, who taught me everything I knew up to a certain point. When he sort of broke up with me over email, that was tough.
That's tough.
But again, what I've experienced is not a drop in the ocean. Yeah. And so
that's amazing. Yeah.
My friend Stan Mitchell often says, if you are standing in solidarity with someone and you're not being hit by the rocks that are being thrown at them, you're probably not standing close enough.
Ooh, I like this Stan Mitchell. That's good.
You would love Stan.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
You should talk to him. But so that's sort of my, like, I don't feel like, everybody's got scars. Everybody's, has loss. I to get into a little bit of a Pauline language, like I consider all loss gain. Yes. To be hopefully a little bit more in step with what I think the Spirit of God is doing in the world. And to be able to look my kids in the eye when it's all said and done and say, wasn't perfect. I know as progressive and as forward thinking as I try to be, future generations are going to look at people like me and they're going to say, can you believe they still ate meat? Right. Can you still believe they did? We're going to be wrong on so many things. And I want, if I'm alive to see that, I want to embrace the critique. But I want to be able to say to my kids around issues of justice, around the LGBTQ plus community, around standing against white supremacy and systemic racism, around those issues that really against misogyny. Right. I want to be able to say that I did everything I could. Yeah. Because I want them to do everything they can in their
that's
time.
So good. That's so good. And as an 8, I don't have a lot of feelings. We're in the aggressive stance. We don't feel as much as other people, but I can feel that, and I appreciate that. And it's just part of you being Enneagram 7, the advantage of being the person in aggressive stance who is a forward thinker. Right. And so there's so much that you're taking in that feels probably very natural to you and using to help other people that it wouldn't be natural for. And that's beautifully impressive to me.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
I'm not kind a whole lot, so go with that, right? Yeah. 2 on that, because it's the nice thing I'm going to say ever. Yeah, but it is about social justice, right? It's about that we can do our part, and I love what you said, Stan said, like we've got to be close enough so that we get hit too, right? If someone else is being harmed, like at what point is it really about being there for our neighbor opposed to in thought being there for our neighbor?
Yeah, otherwise it's just performative.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Otherwise it's just performative. And that to me is sort of when activism or any sort of thing like that goes tragic, which is when it becomes about the person doing it. Yeah. And it tends to be, a straight white cisgender male who ends up wanting all the credit.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm very aware of the social situation I occupy in the world, or I try to be most of the time.
Right.
And I think that there is no space for performative anything. Like it is about being in this with people and working toward sort of that the liberation of all of us, because anybody who's being oppressed, the oppressors are oppressing themselves.
Right.
And there is this other way of being where we're all free to be who we are and transformed, and everybody has what they need. And, I think Jesus called that vision the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And I still think that is a pretty good vision for the world. And that's why I've given my energy to try help see that bit by bit, increment by increment, hopefully, at least in my immediate area where I have something I can do about it, see that become a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in your preaching and just your intentionality with people, and one of the things you're doing is talking right now openly on social media about 5 misconceptions of the Bible and deconstruction and reconstruction. And so is there some of those 5 misconceptions that you think would help our audience for those of us who have, for a plethora of reasons, been harmed by the church?
Sure. I mean, so this past week I talked about how the Bible isn't inerrant and infallible. It's the misconception is that somehow the Bible dropped out of the sky. Leather bound, gilded edges with my name on it. King James version, because you got to have the version. You got to have the same language Jesus spoke, right?
Right.
And it's just not the case. In the piece yesterday, I argue for a different way of seeing the Bible as a product of community, as a product of context that is still beautiful, and it shows sort of a trajectory forward. But if we get lost in trying to affirm everything the Bible affirms, then we can be in big trouble. What I'm going to write about next week is this whole idea that, this whole idea of being biblical. Like, what does that even mean? Because lots of things are biblical, and lots of contradicting things are biblical. You can make a good case from the Bible that killing your enemies is the way to go.
Yes, it's true.
You can also make, I think, a good case from the Bible, and it is the way we should go, which is loving your enemies, and nonviolence is the path forward.
Right.
They're both in there.
Right.
And so, when, you can make a case that biblical marriage involves a man, a woman, their concubine, his concubine, and any number of, prisoners of war he happens to bring home. And this whole idea of being biblical, it really is kind of a straw man that takes our attention away from actually wrestling with what is the Bible and how do we use it in a way that is ethical, and how do we engage it in a way that doesn't just cement us in the past, but a way that propels us forward.
It is about being propelled forward. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think the work you're doing is crucial. I know that when I can hear someone share, and particularly my pastor's name is Naeem, and was raised Muslim, and now obviously he's a Christian. And so when he shares about history he knows from the Middle East and applying that to the Bible in different content of something, people are very apt to hear that and believe that. But if you take that same type of philosophy of more content, more history into something that's comfortable for people, like what marriage is, that is where for some reason people automatically say heresies, automatically don't believe the person and start pulling away.
Yeah. One of my favorite critiques I've heard is when people say, well, you're just telling people what they want to hear. I don't want to go to church and be told what I want to hear. Actually, what they're saying is the opposite.
Right.
I'm not telling them what they want to hear.
Right.
They do want to go to church and be told what they want to hear.
Right. Yeah.
But they've sort of been told that by, and this whole idea of, well, I'm not telling you my opinion. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. Right. The Bible doesn't say anything. Yeah. We make the Bible say.
That's right.
The Bible has to be interpreted.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of preachers out there who are, I hope unintentionally, but doing some, it's some kind of like icky. It's just icky is a theological term for me.
Yeah, I like it. I like the theological term.
This sort of thing where they're sort of making claims of, well, I'm not biased and I'm not interpreting. I'm just telling you the facts. When actually everything is an interpretation. There are no facts. Yeah. If there are facts, we don't have access to them because it is impossible for a human being to be objective.
Yes. Well, there's too much implicit bias.
Too much.
Right. Yeah. So
and
much
confirmation bias and
yes. Well, we all have autobiographical. Well, how do I put this? Like, so much of our memory within our body is done pre-verbal, and so your reaction to someone's frowning at you can be because that's how your grandfather looked at you, and you don't know that's why you get upset, right? Because it is implicit. Right. It's within it's within our the imprint within our autonomic nervous system, and so that is why everyone is biased. Every experience you've had comes into that moment. Yep. And that can be used for good. That can be used for comfort.
Sure. And, becoming aware of the lenses we have on, I'm wearing contacts right now, and when there's nothing wrong with them, I don't even know they're there.
Right.
And that's how it is with our worldview. It's how it is with the lens through which we read the Bible, through the lens through which we see our neighbor, through which we interpret things. And so becoming aware of the bias and the lens that I have as a straight, white, cisgender American male.
Right.
And there are times I'm not aware of it, of course, but trying to be conscious and aware of that, specifically in the way I engage the Bible, right? Because the Bible was written by people who were the opposite of me in every possible way, almost.
Yes.
People who were on the underside of power, people who weren't privileged, but people who were again and again being mistreated and oppressed. And so for me, it is to come to the Bible. I generally now have this, like when my initial interpretation of a text, I'm like, I hold that in suspicion just till I can vet it against all the privilege and all the,
that's good. Yeah.
Just the stuff that I bring into the world that is tied to my social situation.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So, I specialize in trauma and shame. For those of us who have trauma, shame gets very intertwined with it, especially on the age of 8. And I bring that up because I believe that because we all have a history stored within us of shame, and many parents will shame us for having needs or shame us for desires, that when a pastor does it, another person of authority does it, there's a comfort. There's a familiarity that happens for people. And I think that's why they're saying, I don't want to go to church and just hear what I want to hear. When they actually is hearing what they want to hear, because there's a comfortability of thinking, if I can suppress my natural desires, if I can stay within this box, then I'm a good kid.
Yeah. And where the shame becomes, it's not, the shame continues to wound us, but in the moment, it's sort of like, that's what I needed.
Yeah.
I needed to feel bad about myself.
That's right. That's right.
As opposed to, actually, no, you don't. You're made in the image of God. You being fully alive and fully yourself and fully free would be the greatest gift you could give the world.
Yes. Yes.
But there's that whole thing about if you leave church feeling good about yourself, then something's wrong.
Yes.
Whereas when somebody says to me, I left GracePointe feeling better about myself than I did when I came in, I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
For that person, we did our job today. We reminded them that they were beloved. We reminded them that they were in the image of God.
Yeah. That's the word, isn't it? Beloved. Yeah. Right. That we are beloved. And the idea of knowing that, because that is really when we're expanding the kingdom. That's what's attractive to the non-believer, is that we are in love and we are able to receive love. We can offer it and we can receive it. That takes effort, right? And so this idea that in certain churches, if I'm very against myself, then I will be elevated in the church.
Yeah, that's so heartbreaking, isn't it? That
it is.
This faith that should be about bringing up about our most whole, fully integrated selves is the thing that has ended up causing so many people to feel broken and disintegrated.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So what is your vision with your church? Because again, I know that you are, my word, courageous and wanting everyone to know there's a table to come to, that there truly is an open table, that there really is hope for all. So in that, what's your vision? How do you go towards that? And how are you involving your members towards that vision?
GracePointe has become, over the last year, the pandemic forced us online. And so over the last year, we really did become a global community. We have people in Europe, we have people in Canada, we have people all over the United States, and of course here in Nashville. And so I like to think of creating pockets of resistance all over the place. Resistance against hate, resistance against, homophobia, misogyny, white supremacy. Like these are the things we're working on. So I like to think of, and I hear from people all the time who are asking, can you start a GracePointe here? Can you start a GracePointe over there? Can you?
Right.
And I don't know what the future looks like in terms of that. I know that we want to help this movement, this progressive Christian movement, this movement of being LGBTQ plus affirming. We want to see this thrive. And so as we think about our future, it is also beyond just our own community. How do we help other communities? I talk and meet with pastors, generally on Zoom, but way more than anybody would possibly imagine. Some are sort of in a Nicodemus situation where they're sneaking out at night and just saying, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Some are in the throes of this journey. And that is, that is such a gift to be trusted to be involved in those conversations. So I really do have part of my heart, part of my goal is to be able to be a good resource for pastors. I'm only 40, so I'm not super old, but I've been in this for a long time now. This is my 24th year doing this stuff. And I feel like I've, got experience that I can share. And so I see part of that as my role too, as being not only with pastors, but I have folks from all over the world who reach out who are, whether they're trying to figure out, can you connect me with somebody to help me figure out how to come out, or can you just listen to me share my story? I think one of the things we long for as human beings is just to be heard.
Absolutely.
And just to know we're not alone.
To be heard and be seen.
Yeah. So, we have all sorts of hopes and dreams for what GracePointe could be and do in the world. And we're just going to keep taking those opportunities as they come and try to make sure that whatever we do, that we leave the world in better shape than we're finding it right now.
Well, you're definitely doing that. Josh, how do you self-connect with all this going on? And being a pastor is an incredibly hard job, right? So how are you self-caring? What do you do to make sure you stay connected to who you really are?
I love reading. Well, I also have 5 kids, so there's really never a dull moment. But I love reading. I watch sports. I'm not great at meditation. I try. My brain doesn't stop very much.
Right.
But honestly, some of the place I find the greatest sense of grounding is just with my family. My kids are. Anytime somebody's like, "Hey, we'll come hang out with you and your kids," I'm like, "You're really brave," because it's a lot.
It's a lot.
But they're also just the most terrific humans on the planet. And so, so much of where I could feel like maybe I could lose myself in some of this work. It's like they kind of know who I am, and so being with my family is really grounding for me.
That's great. Yeah,
and also they don't care who I am. So, you know what I mean? It's sort of like I'm just dad, and they don't expect me to know everything. I get to be.
Right.
that version of me, and I just love it.
Yeah. They don't want to sit beside you because you're the pastor. They want to sit beside you because you're dad.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What's been the most surprising thing about your adult life?
That I've never actually felt like an adult.
Yeah. I relate to that tremendously.
Like I ask people sometimes, when does that, because I remember watching my parents were like 22 and 21 when I was born.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad was my age when I was like almost graduating high school.
Right.
And they always just seemed like adults. Like they had this whole other, like they hit us, when you're 18, you're 20, you have a kid, the switch flips and suddenly you're a grown up. And I ask people, what I'm finding out is I don't think it exists. Yeah. People are faking it. We're all faking it.
Right.
Deep down, we're kids. And so for me, that has been just surprising that I was afraid, like when you become an adult, you stop being fun. Mm-hmm. And you stop having sort of, you have to become this boring. And for me, it's been like, oh no, I think now I'm having more fun than I did when I was I'm actually having more fun now than I did when I was in my 20s. And I think that's
that is
terrific.
Great. Yeah. And very much Enneagram 7 thing as well.
Very much.
Right. Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah. So what have you noticed about when, like, your preaching style? Like, how does your, the aspects of being an Enneagram 7 come into that?
I've learnand more from stand-up comedians than I have from good preachers.
That's good. That's a great line.
You know what I mean? Like, so and so much of my preaching, one of the hard things about the pandemic for me was having to be more manuscripted because there was nobody there.
Yes, it's hard.
Because generally my sermons are, I have an outline. I know where I'm going. There's content we're going to hit, but I really am responding in real time to whatever's happening in front of me. Like I don't plan jokes and that sort of thing. It just sort of is I let my reflexes work. When I was really nervous, I was nervous when the pandemic started because I didn't know if I could preach to a camera. And then I was nervous when we were going to start in-person gatherings again because did I forget? And I also had COVID last November, and I was a long hauler. And so the fatigue and the shortness of breath, and I had brain fog for a good chunk of time. Wow. That when I would do a podcast like this during that time, I normally could just do what I'm doing now with you and just go off the cuff on stuff. But I would have to make notes in between things because I would forget what I was going to say, or I would forget what they were even asking me. Yeah. And, fortunately, after, it could just be a coincidence, but it seemed like after I got my second vaccine, that started to alleviate, and I feel pretty normal now in terms of all that.
Yeah, that's scary.
It was real scary. I really struggled too. Like I think I was in a period of depression about it because there was sort of like this thing that was always my thing, which was being able to just sort of go with it and extemporaneously figure it out. Like that was gone. And that was like, oh, I don't know how to do me, how to be me without that sort of thing I can do in the world. And it's been a joy to be able to slip back into that comfort mode.
Oh, I bet. Is your congregation open to your struggle and your depression during that time, or having COVID? Were people very loving to you during that?
People were, they were very kind. I also didn't talk about it a lot when I was going through it because I was processing how I felt about it. I've talked about it more on the other side of it.
Gotcha.
I actually, the first Sunday of Advent, I had COVID and I recorded the sermon anyway.
Right.
And I remember somebody commented, he looks more pale than he usually does. And somebody's like, that's because he has COVID.
That's great. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, I think it's just amazing. It sounds like through your struggle with belief, your trauma and the compound grief, like there's such an authenticity that came into your essence, right? That attached to that so that you could just meet people where they are. Like what a gift.
Well, that is my goal with people, is just to meet them. Yeah. Not my expectation of them, not other people's, interpretation of them, but like, what if I just encounter this human being and we'll just see who they are. We'll discover who they are. Yeah. And I feel like that's a gift to be able to do with people,
It is a gift. Yeah, it's absolutely a gift. It's really good. Well, you're a gift. I want to wrap up by putting you in the hot seat real quick. And I'm just going to ask you just a few questions. Just respond to whatever comes to mind first. And we'll use that, put you in the hot seat real quick. All right. So first word that comes to mind when you hear COVID?
Exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about your playlist.
I am an unapologetic, massive U2 fan.
Yeah, I can see that in the background.
Yeah, a friend of mine painted that Bono for me.
Yeah.
So, but generally I'm like, I like all sorts of things. So playlists for me will have some U2 on it. I have a lot of 90s stuff on it, like a lot of 90s rock. I now realize why my dad listened to Fleetwood Mac and the Doobie Brothers and all that all the time when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was like, why doesn't he listen to new music? I get it now because my oldest kid's asking me the same question. So like,
that's great.
I still love some Matchbox 20 and that sort of thing.
All right.
I love Taylor Swift. I think Taylor Swift is absolutely incredible and is still not even close to peaking.
Right.
And I like, kind of depressing stuff, like, stuff that would have been like Death Cab for Cutie is a band I still really like, especially their acoustic stuff, which is just depressing, and I love it so much.
Yeah, that's great.
So I really am eclectic. I like rap, hip hop, R&B stuff too. So my playlist really will be like, you will never know what is coming on next because it could be just anything.
Yeah, that's great. All right. What is your favorite all-time movie?
Oh, I'm afraid in so many ways, this is just going to be so disappointing for people.
So I have a guess what it would be for you. And I just met you, but go ahead. Tell me what is it?
And you know what happens to me when somebody asks me this? The Enneagram 7 kicks in and it's hard to narrow it.
Right.
I feel like some days I would say my favorite movie of all time is National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I don't know that I have a favorite. I love comedies. I love comedies, but also like horror and, I'm just, if you put a movie on, I'll sit down and watch it.
Right. Well, let me ask you, how many times have you seen Elf?
Oh, love Elf.
Yeah. I knew you had to love Elf. You were 7.
Oh,
and plus it's a great movie.
We watch it so I have a list of movies that we just watch every Christmas. So that some of them the kids don't watch because I am a complete believer that Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
Right.
And so like that, Die Hard, Home Alone 1 and 2, which, take me back to being a 10-year-old. So all those. And also another one that would be close to my top favorite movie of all time would be Ghostbusters. Yeah,
absolutely. Great movies. I love that. That is so good. All right. Last question for you. If you could give yourself a different name, what would you pick?
Oh my gosh. That is an incredible question.
Thank you.
I don't know that I think that sometimes when I hear the name Josh, I think that's kind of a weird name. But I don't know what else to be. My middle name is Adam. And there are times I thought when I was younger, like maybe I'll just go by Adam.
Yeah.
But I never was able to do it. If I got to pick anything, I would probably do something like U2 did with Bono and the Edge and come up with some other name like that. Like just totally out there. Like, oh gosh, I don't even know. I couldn't pick another name for me. I don't know.
All right. Well, we'll just stick with Josh Scott because who you are is a gift. And I think you are absolutely amazing. I'm so glad that you're in the world and you're in the world exactly the way that you are. And you're helping some other people know that they have a right to be in this world and be who they are. So I thank you for that very much. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Being here is an honor. This work is an honor. And we're just going to keep going.
Keep doing the deal. Well, to all y'all that are listening to Josh Scott, I just want y'all to know to check the notes, find out how you can find him on Facebook, on Instagram, other places, to subscribe to his emails, be a part of his world. He is teaching people daily for free because it's his heart. So I'm sure you've heard something today that flipped your lid. And I'm also very sure this time you heard something to help you reconnect to who God really says you are. We'll see y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Lid with Kim Honeycutt. Please subscribe, rate, and share. You can find Kim on Facebook or Instagram at KBHoneycutt. To get an autographed copy of Kim's book, visit butyourmotherlovesyou.com. Remember, no matter what, treat yourself well today.